Today we're going to compare the differences between every iPhone Apple is currently selling in 2024 to help you decide which iPhone is going to make the most sense for you to buy if you're in the market for a new iPhone this year. And before we get started, I want to give a big thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Most of you watching this are probably familiar with VPNs, but if not, a virtual private network will help you keep what you do online safe and private, preventing someone with bad intentions from intercepting your private information, which is especially useful when using unsecured Wi-Fi networks. As someone who does a lot of work in coffee shops using public unsecured Wi-Fi networks, using a VPN is a must-have for me, as it allows me to safely access sensitive things such as online banking from any Wi-Fi network. And in addition to security, there's a host of other features VPNs enable, such as access to restricted content libraries not typically available in your country, as you're able to switch your virtual location to another country. Surfshark is currently offering a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you use promo code ULTIMATEiDevice, you'll get up to 6 additional months for free. I'll leave a link to where you can check out Surfshark VPN in the description down below. Big thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. So let's begin with the iPhone 15 Pro models. So these are the most top-of-the-line, spec'd out, most expensive iPhones that you probably don't need. So we have the iPhone 15 Pro that starts at $999 and the iPhone 15 Pro Max that starts at $1,199. So yes, these are absurdly expensive phones. So we have two display size options for the iPhone 15 Pro models, being the smaller 6.1-inch 15 Pro and the larger 6.7-inch 15 Pro Max. Both of these iPhones feature Apple's Pro triple lens camera system with a 48 megapixel main lens in addition to a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens and a 12 megapixel telephoto zoom lens. Photos and videos taken on these iPhones are absolutely stellar, the absolute best experience for iPhone photographers and content creators. And thanks to the telephoto zoom lens, you're able to get up to 3 times optical zoom on the 15 Pro and up to 5 times optical zoom on the 15 Pro Max, basically meaning you can get a very close zoom with these cameras. They feature Super Retina XDR OLED ProMotion displays, and ProMotion being Apple's name for a 120Hz display, meaning the picture on the screen is able to refresh up to 120 times per second on the Pro iPhone 15s, which makes scrolling and animations look extra smooth. Meanwhile, the non-Pro iPhones, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, have a lower 60Hz display refresh rate. The Pros also feature an always-on display, allowing you to always see the time and your notifications, while the non-Pro iPhones don't have that. And the 15 Pros feature what Apple calls Dynamic Island, which is basically the new pill-shaped cutout at the top of the screen, which houses the front camera and some other sensors, rather than the notch design that some older iPhones have had. And Apple has built some cool software features that kind of work around the cutout. In terms of design, they feature titanium edges and a frosted back glass design. This new titanium material being exclusive to the 15 Pros here, but considering you'll probably be using a case on your iPhone, this material change won't have any substantial impact on your experience with the phone. They also feature a new action button rather than the mute switch on the non-Pro iPhones, and you can configure this new action button to trigger a wide variety of actions. And of course, these iPhones feature the new USB-C port rather than the proprietary Lightning port that all previous iPhone generations have had. So this means you're able to charge your device with the same cable most other types of phones and gadgets use, which is a really nice addition. And they're powered by Apple's latest A17 Pro chip. But in terms of choosing an iPhone from Apple's lineup in 2024, I wouldn't let the processor powering the phone play a real role in your choice, because every iPhone in Apple's lineup right now includes either the A15, A16, or A17 Pro chips, which all have plenty of power and longevity for pretty much anybody. And the only real differences between the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max come down to size, battery life, camera options, and of course the price. So of course the smaller 15 Pro has the advantage of being more pocketable and comfortable to hold, while the larger 15 Pro Max is going to be great for media consumption. And in terms of battery life, the larger 15 Pro Max is going to have incredible battery life as there's more space in the enclosure for a larger battery, while the smaller 15 Pro is going to have less good battery life. Don't get me wrong, the smaller 15 Pro is still going to have fantastic battery life by most people's standards, but it's not going to be to the insane degree of good battery life that the 15 Pro Max will have. And in terms of cameras, the main and ultra-wide lenses are exactly the same on the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. However, the telephoto zoom lenses differ. As I mentioned earlier, the 15 Pro's telephoto lens has a max optical zoom of 3 times, while the 15 Pro Max has a max optical zoom of 5 times. So you're able to get a closer zoom on the larger model. And finally, we have the price difference of $200 between the $999 entry-level price for the 15 Pro and the $1,199 entry-level price for the 15 Pro Max. In past years, there's always only been a $100 difference between the Pro model and the Pro Max model of the current iPhone. But Apple made the entry-level storage capacity for the 15 Pro Max 256 gigabytes this year, while the smaller 15 Pro's entry-level storage capacity is 128 gigabytes. So that's kind of how they're justifying raising the entry-level price for the 15 Pro Max. So since the 15 Pros here are the most powerful, advanced, and most expensive iPhones Apple sells, they're very popular phones for that reason alone, for those who can afford them. And if money isn't an issue for you, these are undoubtedly the best iPhones you can buy right now. However, there's very few people that actually need the newest Pro iPhones. And honestly, most people are better off saving some money and going for one of the cheaper other iPhone models that Apple is currently selling. And moving on to the standard tier non-Pro iPhone 15 models, which in my opinion are the best new iPhones for most people this year. So we have the iPhone 15, which starts at $799, and we also have the iPhone 15 Plus, which starts at $899. So just like the Pro models, we have the same two display size options for the standard tier 15s, being the smaller 6.1-inch 15 and the larger 6.7-inch 15 Plus. And this is nice because you don't have to go for one of the Pro models just for wanting one size, as the very same display size options are offered in both the standard tier for the iPhone 15 and the Pro tier for the iPhone 15. Both of these iPhones feature Apple's advanced dual camera system, featuring a 48 megapixel main lens and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens. Photos and videos on these iPhones are going to look absolutely fantastic, and they offer a noticeable improvement in comparison to the previous generation standard iPhone 14s and iPhone 13s. You'll notice the improvement most when zooming in on a photo you've taken. There's just more detail on the iPhone 15 models, and this is a result of the older models having a 12 megapixel main lens, while the iPhone 15s here have again that new 48 megapixel main lens. So you'll be getting stellar camera quality on the iPhone 15 models. Now you don't get that additional telephoto zoom lens on the standard tier iPhone 15 models that you get on the Pro iPhone 15 models. So your max optical zoom is 2 times on both the iPhone 15 and the 15 Plus, as opposed to the 3 times optical zoom on the 15 Pro and the 5 times optical zoom on the 15 Pro Max. But you probably won't need this level of zoom capability in your day-to-day life, so I wouldn't let that be a deciding factor in getting one of the non-Pro iPhones versus one of the Pro iPhones, because the cameras on both tiers are great. Both of these iPhones feature Super Retina XDR OLED displays with 60Hz display refresh rates, as opposed to the 120Hz display refresh rates that the 15 Pros have, which means animations and scrolling will look a little less smooth on these iPhones in comparison to the Pro iPhones. But this isn't something that the average iPhone user is going to care much about. A lot of people say they don't even notice this difference. The display on the standard iPhone 15s here look absolutely fantastic, very sharp with rich color and detail. And as I mentioned a little earlier in the video, unfortunately you don't get an always-on display with the standard 15s here like you get on the Pro iPhone 15s, which means you'll have to wake up your device every time you want to glance at the time or your notifications. Not a huge deal, but it would be nice to have that always-on display capability. And these iPhones also get the dynamic island pill-shaped cutout at the top of the screen to house the front camera and some other sensors, rather than the old notch design on older iPhones. And of course, you get to take advantage of those software features Apple has built around the cutout on these models as well. And in terms of design, they feature aluminum sides and a frosted back glass, which feels quite premium in the hand. It's nice that the standard iPhones this year feature the same frosted back glass texture that the Pro iPhones have. It makes them feel more premium. These iPhones are powered by the Apple A16 chip, which is Apple's second to latest generation iPhone processor chip, and it packs more than enough power and longevity for any iPhone user. And of course, these iPhones also feature the new USB-C port, as opposed to the previous proprietary Lightning port that all previous iPhone generations have had in the past decade. And this is great, as you're now able to charge your iPhone with the same cable most other phones and tech products use. And in terms of differences between the 15 and 15 Plus, it comes down to size, battery life, and price. Of course, the smaller 15 will have the pocketability and comfortability advantage, while the larger 15 Plus will be great for consuming media. The 15 Plus will also have incredible battery life, as there's more space for a bigger battery, while the 15 will have less good battery life, but the battery on the smaller 15 is still very good, and it'll most certainly get you through the day as long as you're not like a crazy power user. It's just not to the insane degree of power that the larger 15 Plus has. And of course, the price. So we have a $100 price difference in between these two phones, and $100 extra for a much bigger screen and a bigger battery is not a bad deal if those attributes are important to you. So the standard 15s are a great buy in 2024, as they feature pretty much everything the average person would need in a modern iPhone. And if they're in your price range and you want to get an iPhone that'll last for many years to come without spending, $1,000 plus for one of the Pro iPhones, this is a great option. And next up is the standard tier iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. In terms of the Pro tier of older iPhone generations, like the 13 and 14 Pro series, Apple no longer sells any of those. But they do still sell the standard tier of some older iPhones, so we're going to talk about the standard tier iPhone 14 and 14 Plus now. So we have the iPhone 14, which starts at $699, and we also have the 14 Plus, which starts at $799. And we have the same two display size options for these devices, being the smaller 6.1-inch 14 and the larger 6.7-inch 14 Plus. So the iPhone 14 is kind of a strange device in Apple's lineup right now because it's so similar to the previous generation iPhone 13, to the point where if you're considering buying the smaller non-Plus iPhone 14, I'd highly recommend just going for the iPhone 13 instead. And of course, we're going to talk about the iPhone 13 in just a few minutes. But in terms of the larger 14 Plus, there is some value there, as there is no iPhone 13 Plus. So if you want the cheapest device that has a 6.7-inch display, that is what the iPhone 14 Plus is. Both of the iPhone 14 models feature Apple's dual camera system, featuring a 12 megapixel main lens and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens. And photos taken on these iPhones look absolutely fantastic. It's not going to be quite to the quality of the iPhone 15 series iPhones. When zooming in on photos you've taken, you're not going to have as much detail on these iPhones in comparison to the iPhone 15 models, but it's still more than enough for the average phone user. It's important to remember that these iPhones were the newest iPhones just a few months ago, before the iPhone 15 series came out, so the cameras on these phones are going to be fantastic for the average phone user. So both of these iPhones feature Super Retina XDR OLED displays with 60Hz display refresh rates. So just like the standard 15s we were just talking about, you're not getting the 120Hz display refresh rates that the Pro tier iPhones have had for the last few years. But as I said earlier, this isn't something that matters to the average phone user. The displays on these phones are fantastic, with very rich color and detail. And unfortunately, you don't get the always-on display capability with these devices either. In terms of design, they both feature aluminum sides and a glossy back glass rather than the matte frosted texture on the 15 series. But overall, great premium build quality. These iPhones are powered by the Apple A15 chip. So this is Apple's third to latest iPhone processor chip, and it has plenty of power and longevity for any iPhone user. As I mentioned earlier, Apple Silicon processors have gotten to a point within the last 4 or so years where you don't notice any substantial difference in average day-to-day usage when using a 1 to 2 generation old A-series processor. These iPhones feature the Lightning port, which is Apple's proprietary connector that's been on every iPhone other than the new 15s for the past decade. So unfortunately, you don't get that versatility of having USB-C and being able to use the same cable that most other phones use to charge up your device. But honestly, a lot of people have Lightning cables laying around just because iPhones have had these for the past decade, to the point where it's not like it's an uncommon rare cable, so I definitely would not let the lack of a USB-C port be a deal breaker for getting an older iPhone other than the 15s. The differences between the 14 and 14 Plus come down to size, battery life, and price. Of course, the smaller 15 is much more comfortable to hold and to put in your pocket, while the 14 Plus is going to be incredible for consuming video and media content. And the 14 Plus has much better battery life than the smaller 14, as there's much more space inside for a bigger battery. The 14 still has fantastic battery life that'll definitely get you through a day, as long as you're not a very intense power user, but it's definitely not to the extent of good battery that you're going to get on the 14 Plus. And in terms of price, we have a $100 price difference between the $699 iPhone 14 and the $799 iPhone 14 Plus. Plus. Once again though, if you're considering buying the smaller iPhone 14, I highly recommend going for the iPhone 13 instead, as there's very little difference between the iPhone 13 and iPhone 14, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And in terms of buying the 14 Plus in 2024, I would honestly recommend, if you could spend an extra $100 to get the 15 Plus, I would say do that, because the 15 Plus is just $100 more than the 14 Plus, and you'll be getting the latest iPhone generation with some noteworthy improvements such as a much better camera, USB-C, and the dynamic island pill-shaped cutout, which feels and looks more modern. But again, if you want the very cheapest 6.7-inch iPhone that Apple is currently selling, that's what the 14 Plus is. And next up is the standard tier iPhone 13, which in my opinion is the best overall value, budget-friendly iPhone in the 2024 iPhone lineup. So Apple only sells the one standard tier iPhone 13 with a 6.1-inch display for $599. And this phone is so similar to the one generation newer iPhone 14. So this iPhone features Apple's dual camera system, featuring a 12 megapixel main lens and a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens. And photos and videos taken on this phone look fantastic. Now, the one generation newer iPhone 14's main camera does feature a larger main lens than the iPhone 13 here. This, in addition to some new image processing methods Apple added with the 14, result in slightly better camera performance and some new camera options on the 14. But having compared the 13 to the 14 side by side myself, the difference in your average photo ranges from unnoticeable to very minor difference. So it's definitely not a big enough of a camera improvement to warrant going for the 14 over the 13. The photos taken on the iPhone 13 still look fantastic, as you can see here. And the iPhone 13 also features a Super Retina XDR OLED display with a 60Hz display refresh rate, the same display that the 14 features. So of course you're not going to get that 120Hz display refresh rate that you get on the Pro tier iPhones on this device either. But again, the average phone user isn't going to care about this. And the display on this phone looks fantastic. It's super sharp with rich color and detail. And of course, you unfortunately don't get an always-on display with the iPhone 13 either. And in terms of design, the iPhone 13 features aluminum sides with a glossy back glass. Feels very premium. It's the same design featured in the iPhone 14 series. It's powered by the Apple A15 chip, which is Apple's third to latest generation iPhone processor chip. It has plenty of power and longevity for any iPhone user, and this is the same processor that the iPhone 14 has. Starting to see a trend here. However, the A15 processor in the iPhone 14 does feature one additional GPU core than the A15 processor in the 13. But this is something you'll likely never notice in real usage. And battery life on the iPhone 13 is quite good. Of course, it's not going to be as good as a Plus or Pro Max type iPhone, but for a smaller 6.1-inch device, it has solid battery life that'll definitely get you through a day, again, unless you're a very intense power user. This iPhone, of course, also features the Lightning port, which is Apple's proprietary port that's been featured on every iPhone for the past decade, of course, other than the new 15 series iPhones, which feature USB-C, but I would not let the lack of USB-C steer you away from this phone, as since the Lightning port has been around for over a decade, a lot of people have Lightning cables laying around, and it's not like it's a rare cable type. And of course, most people using iPhones haven't upgraded to the iPhone 15, so Lightning is still going to stick around for a long time. So as you can see, the iPhone 13 here is just so similar to the next generation iPhone 14. The iPhone 14 is just such an incremental update to the point where I definitely recommend the iPhone 13 instead, as it's $100 cheaper at $599, while the iPhone 14 costs $699. In terms of other differences between the iPhone 13 and iPhone 14, the iPhone 14 has emergency SOS via satellite and crash detection, which are nice emergency-based features to have, but probably isn't worth an extra $100 just for those, depending on your lifestyle, obviously. And actually an advantage the iPhone 13 has over the iPhone 14 in the United States specifically is the iPhone 13 still has a physical SIM slot here, where in the United States, the iPhone 14 and up, Apple has completely transitioned to eSIM. So if you still like using physical SIM cards, the iPhone 13 still has that slot. But again, this is only relevant for people in the United States. So the iPhone 13 is an easy device to recommend for anybody who doesn't want to buy one of the new iPhone 15 models. I think the 15 is still a better overall value if it's in your price range, as it features a noticeably better camera and USB-C, making it a little bit more future-proofed and modern feeling for the long term. But if you want to save a couple $100 and still have a great iPhone that's just a little bit less high end, I'd recommend going straight down to the iPhone 13 and not even considering the iPhone 14 for all the reasons I just explained. And finally, we have the iPhone SE 3rd generation, which is the cheapest iPhone you could buy in Apple's current lineup, sitting at $429. And this is a phone that I would only recommend to people who don't use their phone that much, don't care about having premium new tech in their device, and don't care about having great battery life. So this iPhone stands out quite a lot in comparison to every other iPhone in the current lineup, as it features the old iPhone 8 style design with a home button, a much smaller 4.7-inch display, a single main camera lens on the back, and just an overall old school design with the rounded corners. So the single 12 megapixel main camera lens on the back is actually a very solid point and shoot camera for someone who isn't super into iPhone photography. The shots actually look fantastic due to Apple's great image processing techniques. However, since there's only the one lens, you don't get much control in terms of zoom level, at a high quality at least. So if you're someone who likes taking a lot of photos at varying levels of distance and you care about the quality, this isn't the phone for you. But honestly, that's not the target demographic for this device. This is definitely a budget iPhone. The iPhone SE 3rd Gen features a Retina HD LCD display with a 60Hz display refresh rate, so you don't get the higher end OLED display technology that every other iPhone in Apple's lineup has. OLED displays allow for a sharper image with better viewing angles and deeper black values. OLED is also more power efficient than LCD. But once again, people who care about the type of display panel in their phone are not the target audience for this device. And honestly, for the average non-tech interested person, this screen looks solid. It's very small in terms of size, but the quality is fine. I think even for a lot of people that don't use their phone that much, this small of a display in 2024 might get a little bit annoying, which is one of the biggest downsides to this phone in the modern era. The iPhone SE3 is powered by the Apple A15 chip, which is Apple's third to latest generation iPhone processor chip, which is the same processor featured in the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13, which is an incredible amount of power and longevity for a budget iPhone like this. So the processing power of this phone is not an area that it lacks in, so it has the same processing power that the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 have, just in the body of an older iPhone 8. So it's a very future-proofed budget iPhone that will get software updates for many years to come, and be fast and responsive for many years to come. The other big downside to this phone is battery life. Since this is such a small, compact, and thin device, the battery is quite small by today's standards, resulting in much worse battery life than any of the other iPhones Apple is currently selling. You'll probably make it through the day if you're a medium to light smartphone user, but if you're on the heavier side of usage, you might not make it through the day with this phone. But once again, the target demographic for this phone is probably light to medium usage smartphone users. Of course, this phone also features the Lightning port, which is again Apple's proprietary port that's been featured on every iPhone in the past decade except for the new iPhone 15s that just came out. So I actually don't recommend the iPhone SE 3rd generation in 2024, as the screen size and battery size are just too antiquated for today's standards, at least in my opinion. If you're able to spend an extra $170 and get the iPhone 13 instead, you're getting such a better value and overall experience than you'll get with the iPhone SE 3rd generation. Using this phone honestly feels very similar to using the almost 10-year-old iPhone 6 from 2014, because it has the overall same screen-to-body ratio and design. And don't get me wrong, it's very fast and powerful due to the A15 processor, but the tiny display size and battery size make it not a great value in today's market. But then again, I know people that love this old size and format, so if you're someone who dislikes how large phone screens have gotten, this could be a good phone for you. It just depends on what you're able to put up with in terms of display size and battery life. So guys, at the end of the day, I think the best overall value iPhones are the standard tier iPhone 15s, as they feature pretty much everything the average person would want out of a modern iPhone, and they're both under the $1,000 price. The standard 15 is starting at $799, and the 15 Plus starting at $899. Now these are still crazy expensive, So if these are above your price range, the next best option is definitely the iPhone 13, as it's $200 cheaper than the standard iPhone 15 at $599 and offers almost the same exact experience, just with a slightly worse camera and a processor that's just one generation older that will still perform more than good enough and will be supported with software updates for at least 3 to 4 more years. But obviously, if money's just not an issue for you, the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max are the very best iPhones that you can buy right now. But the average person will be totally satisfied with one of the standard 15s or the iPhone 13. Again, the only scenario I'd recommend buying something in the 14 series line would be the 14 Plus. If you just want the cheapest device that Apple sells with a 6.7-inch display, the 14 Plus starting at $799. But honestly, at that point, if you can spend an extra $100 to get the 15 Plus at $899, I think that's probably worth it, as you'll be getting the latest generation iPhone. But it's definitely more understandable to go for the 14 Plus if you want a device with a large screen, as if you're interested in the smaller iPhone 14, it's just so similar to the iPhone 13 that the 13 would be the much better value if you want, again, a smaller form factor for a little bit cheaper. And guys, that just about wraps it up for this video. If you're currently using an iPhone, let me know down below in the comments section which model you're using. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and of course, as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.